Hey GMs, welcome back to the Essential GM. Today, we're doing our guide on Chapter 6 of Call of the Netherdeep, and this is probably one of the most complicated parts of the entire module. The good news is this is definitely a long chapter, and it's going to take multiple sessions, so you're going to have room to make mistakes and then learn from them and kind of solidify those rules in your head as we go, just from the repetition. There is a ton of stuff to keep track of. We have Iridium corruption levels, the rivals, placating Elixion, the visions, we have the weird events table. There's a good chance that even the most diligent DMs are gonna miss something somewhere. They're gonna get a rule wrong, or they're gonna miss tracking one of these things, because not only do we have to track all these things, but we are role-playing Elixion, and the roleplay of Elixion is probably one of the most important things of this entire chapter. It sucks to get something wrong or to miss something, but most of the mistakes like that I've ever made in D&D, I've usually forgotten about pretty quickly, and a lot of them are very correctable. You forgot to do a lore vision when they did a short rest? Okay, do 2 next time. Or add another one in just when they enter a room. There's 2 things that I think are really important to keep track of because they matter a lot to the mechanics. First is the fragments of suffering. Now, you're giving those to your players so they can write them down as well as you, so that you have 2 people keeping track of them, and that takes some of the load off of you. The second one is how many times they've placated Elixion. Now this one isn't something that you're necessarily telling them as they go. They may know that one of these visions has gone successfully, but they don't know what the mechanical implication is of that until they actually face off with Elixion. If you write a session recap right after, and you bullet point all the things that happened and all the things that they did, you're going to be able to go back and cross-reference afterwards or before you prep for your next session, even if things got a little chaotic in the midst of the section. This is why I like to write those session recaps right after the session. Of all the things I have to do as a DM, it's probably the one that feels the most like work and like a chore to me, writing these, but it's actually really important, and it comes in handy a lot of times, and I'm always glad that I do it and that I'm diligent about doing it. This is a section where I might consider asking for some extra time to prep, depending on what's going on in my real life and how much time I've had to prep, because this is a big section with a lot of stuff going on. I don't like to do this very often. I think it's okay to be underprepared sometimes, and you can wing stuff and you get more and more used to that the more that you DM. But this section has so many mechanics and so much heavy stuff going on. I wanna make sure that it's fun for me here too, because this is a big, cool moment of the module. There's a couple short sections spread out amongst the rules that not only do I want to review, but I want to have bookmarked for easy access if I do need to look them up before we get to this section. Underwater combat, exhaustion, underwater adventuring, Iridium corruption, emotional torment. These are all pieces that are going to come into play in this chapter, so I want to be relatively versed on them and have them at my fingertips. Now, assuming that you've read the whole module before you started running the campaign, which is what I always recommend that people do, it's okay if you haven't reread this whole chapter before you start doing it. Just doing the bottom part of the map, mostly the Grottos of Regret and a few other pieces that they might sneak into through secret doors or get past that, will be enough to carry you through a whole session, because the visions in that area should take a little bit of time, and you might not even get through all of the Grottos of Regret in one session. And speaking of the Grottos of Regret, this dungeon is divided into 3 pieces. There's the Grottos of Regret, which are green, the Vents of Fury, which are red on the map, and the Chasm of Yearning, which is blue on the map. So each section here has its own distinct mood, and one way I want to try and emphasize that is by playing different music for each section. Something more melancholy for the Grottos of Regret, something a little bit angrier and faster for the Vents of Fury, and something a little bit more hopeful for the Chasm of Yearning. Tabletop Audio is one site that I like, and the main thing that I like is that not only do they automatically loop, and they're pretty long, like 10 minutes, a lot of the tracks also include ambient sound, so if you're in a tavern, glasses clinking and drinks pouring and, background chit chat to really bring that environment to life. But you could use anything, Spotify, YouTube, whatever you get music from, there's gonna be stuff there, and there are people making RPG stuff with that ambient sound on a lot of these platforms as well. Because we haven't really talked about music at all in this series yet, I rounded up a bunch of links with suggested places that you might use them across this whole module, and those are all in the description below. The important thing isn't whether the players realize that there's, a distinct Grottos of Regret in the green area and a distinct Vents of Fury in the red area and so forth. What's more important is that they just feel these sort of swinging emotions of Elixion, because that's going to be really important in the next chapter. Players are going to have a choice to redeem Elixion or destroy him. That's why I want to, in this section, really push his emotions in all of those directions really hard, to have him be all of these things so that when they have to make that choice, they might be debating with each other or unsure of what to do, so that's a hard choice for them. So in the first of our 3 sections, the Grottos of Regret, where we enter the Netherdeep, Elixion is probably the most talkative here as that disembodied voice. He's showing them his past, but also giving them a chance to sort of give their take on what they would have done in his shoes so that he can get perspective on these events. I think these visions of Elixion's past and letting the players have some interaction with them and figure out what they would do and how they would solve it is a cool mechanic. I'm a little concerned that this might feel like it's dragging because there's sort of vision after vision after vision, and each one could take a little bit because some of them have pieces to figure out or things to do or battles to have. One way that we could make this shorter if it feels like it's dragging is to just skip a room. We could have the rivals have already visited it and we could just leave evidence that they had been there and they're ahead, and that puts on the sort of race with the rivals a little bit. If you don't want to use the rivals or they're behind your party or they're not there, something else you could do is maybe try to hint at a secret door. Maybe there's some debris that knocks into the door and someone notices that something seems weird about it. That's only giving away one door, but it might get them checking for more doors. So even if you did it, say, for N4, they might discover this one in N5 and then get into the Vents of Fury a little bit sooner before doing some of these other areas. Next, we have the Vents of Fury, the red areas. And here Elixion is malicious, he's cruel, he's not what we just saw in the last section. Oh, and he's also going to boil the water around the characters too. I want to talk about N15 where you meet Theo and Elixion the Hunter. Now, Elixion the Hunter, you know, your party's safe from him as long as Theo's there, but a few rooms later, Theo's gonna disappear, and you're gonna have this hunter go after the party. Now, you're already tracking all these other things, and I don't really want to make it complicated, so I'm just gonna sort of have his invisible token and kind of follow the party, and when it feels like it's been enough time, have him show up at the door for a little fun. Now the last section, the Chasm of Yearning, might be my favorite section. Here, Elixion is gonna be talking probably a lot less than the other sections, and his tone is a little bit of a in-between of the other two. He really wants to be understood, and he's gonna use this weird events table and sort of these manifestations of himself to try and push that forward a little bit. If he does speak, he's going to be, you know, pretty confident and bold about it though, I think, but not malicious like in the Vents of Fury. We've had all this lore about Elixion, and it's been kind of a big dump of Elixion stuff, and we haven't had a lot of stuff for the players and their individual characters. And this gives us some moments where they can do it. There's one room where they have to describe their character's perfect future that they see in this vision. And they're a little bit more in these visions as their own character, and it gives them a chance to sort of role play it out, which is really nice to give them a chance to be their characters rather than to just hear the story of Elixion. One overall piece I wanted to point out is there's 2 rooms with the Death's Embrace, and we fought a Death's Embrace in Kael Morro probably too. Now some of these they might bypass without getting in the battle, but if they actually have 2 of those fights, I might just remove the 3rd room that has the Death's Embrace to not be so repetitive and to sort of cut down and thin this out to some of the better parts that are more unique and original. The Netherdeep is just a pressure cooker of emotions. Yes, of course, it's mostly Elixions that we've been talking about, but let's not forget that at this point it's extremely likely that some or all of your players have gotten some degree of Iridium corruption. And one of the effects of that is that it amplifies emotion, rage, yearning, regret, you know, all the emotions we see here. And those should be ratcheted up. It's the player's responsibility to do that, but you have to let them know this is an effect of Iridium corruption. And you might want to remind them or try to guide them to actually role play this out so that this whole pressure cooker starts to feel like it, this intensity. Now another group that might be a little emotional here are the rivals. They also have Iridium corruption. They've been through some stuff. All of these emotions are going to be amplified for them too, especially if they're really far along in their Iridium corruption. Now the book suggests that you would perhaps either plant the rivals in N1 and have them there right at the beginning for the players to sort of bump into. And I actually really like that from a storytelling perspective. Like, it makes this dungeon more interesting if you're sort of racing around and trying to collect these things fast and have this competition. But with the number of things that there are to track here, I'm considering going with the other suggestion, which is to just sort of have them show up in N26 for a final showdown. There's so much going on and there's so much to track that might just be something that makes it a little bit more fun for me to not have to deal with one more thing. But I'll have to see how I feel, you know, how Kael Morrow goes, what the relationships are with the rivals when we get to this point. Those are all going to be factors in that decision, but I think they're both good places no matter which one you choose. Because of all this emotional stuff going on, and the fact that the Apotheon himself is potentially manipulating the situation to drive a wedge between your two groups to play you off of one another, you're probably going to end up fighting the rivals here, at least according to the book. You may have to feel it out and whether that actually feels appropriate. If they've been super tight the whole campaign and they've never done anything to make each other mad, then that might not happen because your party's not turning against each other, so that wouldn't necessarily make sense. But the idea here is that under most circumstances, you're gonna have a showdown with those rivals somewhere in this dungeon. Now, the part where the relationship will matter is sort of what the rivals do. If they're indifferent or friendly, they're probably gonna retreat. But with their emotions amped up, if they're hostile, they are gonna fight to the death, and your party, at least the way the book writes it, will kill them here. And if they're hostile, if they've had all these bad interactions throughout the book, that's gonna feel good anyway. But that's also why if they're indifferent or friendly, we don't really want the party to kill them because that might feel kind of crappy for them, right? This is one module that there's just a lot of branches and possibilities as to what will go down and what your PCs will do. So you're just gonna have to make that call of how they would behave in the scenario, but think about how it's feeling as you lead up to it and which thing sounds like it'll be the best fit for the story that has unraveled before you. Once our players have dealt with the rivals and have enough fragments of suffering, they can enter the Heart of Despair for that final showdown with Elixion, which is what I'm gonna cover in the next video. So if you wanna check that out, make sure to subscribe. Until then, keep rolling and have fun.